reporting you. Rich balloons 800.
If I could say it and dream it and think it, then would it be real? If I could taste it, kiss, hug and embrace it, then how could it not be real? Oh no, the pain inside is happening. Is this happening? No, this time I can't wake up. Please don't wake me up.
Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Psalms 82:4. Hello and welcome to today's edition of Thinking Clearly. I'm your host, Josh Holler. Today's program is featuring our very special guest, Brent Messimer. Brent serves at Uganda Outreach as the Director of Evangelism. In 2003, Brent earned a Bachelor of Arts from Central Christian College of the Bible with majors in missions and counseling. Most recently, he was awarded a Master's of Divinity from Lincoln Christian University. Brent is the co-founder and president of Rescue Innocence, a Christian organization designed to network people wanting to be a part of a solution to human trafficking worldwide, raising awareness and helping rescue victims from this modern-day epidemic. As a missionary kid in South Africa and minister for over 14 years, Brent has a heart for the Lord and his children all over the world and works actively to share the love of Christ locally and abroad. Brent joins us today to discuss his article, The Veil, and share about the impact and depth of his ministry to end modern-day slavery. Brent, thank you for joining with us today.
Nice to be here, Josh.
Now, our listeners are probably stirred a little bit to think that we still have slavery going on today, maybe a little surprised. But it's just that, isn't it?
It is slavery. The truth is that in the same way slave ships used to go across the Atlantic to bring people to the United States and all over the world, we are still in a situation where human traffickers are going to locations where people are vulnerable, where they can be exploited. And it's not even in Africa. It's not just in India, the poorer, more undeveloped areas. It's happening in our neighborhoods as well.
Before we dive deeper into this issue, I just would like, for the benefit of our listeners, to define some key terms. What is sex trafficking, and is that different from human trafficking, and exactly how widespread is this occurring right now?
Sex trafficking is exactly that. It's when somebody is exploited for sexual acts. And it is a kidnapping, it is a coercion, it is when somebody is taken against their will and forced to do sex work. Human trafficking can be for slave labor as well. So very often you have people working in hotels, restaurants, and fields.
Right,
And
right.
those people are trafficked as humans. But it's for slave labor, so it is against their will, not to be confused with smuggling, where people want to leave the place that they are and they're smuggled into a country. Those individuals go willfully, and it's a hope that the smuggler will be true to their word. With human trafficking, it's a situation where these people are actually brought under false pretenses, blackmail, coercion, with a lie, and forced to do either sexual slavery or labor slavery or both.
And so something I'm going to infer, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but because the entire nature of sex trafficking and human trafficking is done through deception, it's hard to get an actual figure to actually gauge how widespread it is.
That's exactly right. The official number as far as globally is 27 million. Most of the organizations use that figure, UNICEF, the FBI. But the more you get into this issue, the thought is that it's probably even higher than that, which is staggering. It's a terrifying thought.
And so, Brent, why did you entitle your article The Veil?
The idea of the veil came about just working with young ladies, and it is such a complicated process to a person being trafficked and getting caught up in the sex work to where very often from the outside they look like a prostitute. And the thought is a prostitute is there willfully, And so even a victim of trafficking who's been manipulated by her traffickers, by her now pimp, will feel like this is what she is. This is who she is. She is here to be molested. She's here to be used by men so that her pimps can make money. And so now there's this veil where this young girl, this young boy is called a prostitute. And so people get this impression that they want to be there. They get this impression that they're making money, but it's impossible to do something willfully that you were forced to do. And victims of human trafficking at some point were forced to do the work. There's often a very long grooming period of multiple rapes, gang rapes, starvation, beating, to get these girls, these boys to submit to the person who's wanting to take advantage of them. And very often it takes months to do this. But once that person is broken, when you see a young lady on the street and she's dressed to allure and she's dressed, your first reaction will probably be what a lot of people think, which is a prostitute.
Right.
And she's going to the window of the car and she's seductively dressed and she's saying everything that the passenger
They think
and the
she
driver
wants to be there.
want to hear, yes. But what you're seeing is somebody who's controlled, or somebody whose freedom was taken away to the point that now they don't even know who they are, and they've taken on the survival mode, the responsibility of what we would call a prostitute, but all the while, they're a victim.
So, Brent, it's not so much that people, to get people to believe that it occurs, but they choose not to believe that it occurs. Why is that?
People don't want to see the reality. It's just too cruel. Often parents, they don't want to hear about what's happening because they can't help but imagine that it's their own child. So they choose to be ignorant. They just close their eyes to it. Personally, I'm driven to action for the same reason that they're driven away. I know that might sound strange, but while parents are picturing their own children, I'm picturing the parents. I know that each victim had a mother, had a father, somebody that loves them, and maybe for some reason that person isn't there to protect them when they need it so much. They don't have somebody to say, it's going to be okay, we're here for you. And so it's stepping in for that individual. And the crazy thing, it always goes through my mind when I'm speaking about human trafficking, that one day I might be rescuing the daughter or son of a member in the audience.
Wow.
And you just don't know until you put yourself in a position to help.
Right. Right. So I guess that ties right into my next question. Is that why you find it so incredibly difficult to bring people to be aware that this is taking place? And not only is this taking place, but it's here in the U.S.
It is difficult to let people know that it's actually happening because what they see on the outside isn't necessarily what's happening on the inside. And it takes a long time to build those relationships with the victims to where they feel like they can trust you, to where they know that they can go to you when they've been beaten one too many times, or when they finally feel like they have the strength to go without the drugs, which help them cope with the reality of what was happening to their bodies. And the thing is that very often when people think of human trafficking, they think of movies like Taken.
Right, yeah.
That does happen. It happens quite often where girls are physically taken and they're in need of somebody to come in and rescue them. The sad part is that the rescuer often does not come. And if they do, it's towards the end. It's when the girl has contracted different diseases and is so controlled. And so it takes a long time to build those relationships. You might spend years going to the red light district to build relationships with the ladies that are working there. And it might take that long. And even after all that groundwork, that person might never actually come and say, yes, I want to be rescued. I don't want this life anymore, because the manipulation, the control is so intense that they take on that role.
And I guess that's a big misconception, because it looks like they could just walk out because they're not physically being bounded, but it's a mental, and like you said, they feel like they have to survive because they do have to survive and they have to stay there.
Exactly.
Wow. Now, Brent, you have personally worked with many victims of sex trafficking. When did a moment occur that light went on, that you realized, wow, how easy it is for somebody to become a victim?
I was in a situation where I was working with some people, building relationships with them, and they actually are working in the red light district to reach out to these young ladies who are working the streets. And it's a beautiful ministry. And one of the ladies that was helping, I asked her, how did you come to be here? Because she was from Africa and we were in a part of Europe. And she said, well, it's a long story. And I kind of kidded with her and said, well, I've got plenty of time.
Right.
So she told me I was trafficked here. And it was under false pretense, a job. And so she came by her free will to find that she was being forced to do the work of a prostitute.
Wow. And so she's in another country now. She has no escape. She doesn't even, I can imagine in some circumstances they don't even know the language of the country that they're captive in.
Exactly. And in her case, she had this ministry reaching out to her, and they rescued her. And now she's working to do the same for the girls who are currently working today.
Wow, that's awesome. That's great.
But it was that moment where just realized, this can happen to absolutely anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And you just don't know, because she was just looking for employment. There's false job opportunities posted all the time, just waiting to lure unsuspecting ladies, thinking they're going to be a model, thinking they're going to be a waitress or a nanny. Even young men, they look for jobs to be able to work in factories and to be able to make more of a salary than they can at home. And the end of the journey for both sexes is often a sentence of a life of forced labor and sexual slavery.
Brent, without giving away just too much, but because of the brevity and for the sake of safety of the work you do, can you tell us a little bit about the methodology that you go about to help rescue these women?
It depends on the context of where you are.
Okay.
In some situations, it's a matter of what I was saying earlier, going to where the girls are. I was actually in South Africa, and we were working with prostitutes at a brothel. And what we did is we gave the girls hot chocolate and coffee. Mm-hmm. We let them know, you're valuable. You deserve more than this. And we have a place for you, a safe place. And we even reached out to the pimps. We sat down with them and were able to tell them about Jesus, tell them that God created them with a purpose, that it was more than this. It wasn't to exploit, but was to be a protector. We even reached out to the pimps, and we went around the campfire with them. We told stories to them. We talked about what God wanted for their life, about being protectors instead of abusers. And it's a long process. And in that case, it was a matter of building those relationships. And in other cases, it's a matter of working with local law enforcement and just making a place available for the girls to go to once they have been rescued. Many girls aren't rescued because there's just no place for them. Even here in the United States, there are very few places available for victims of human trafficking. And when the statistic is that there are over 17,000 victims in the United States every year,
wow.
The numbers are staggering. And so the need for safe places, it's astronomical. And that's just one of the many ways that we can combat human trafficking. Another is education. It's getting to the girls before the traffickers do, letting them know there are people who make a living finding out through Facebook and other avenues where girls live, who their friends are, and then meeting with them intentionally at the mall, at different places, at the movie theater, and starting these conversations. And we're not talking about, the Hollywood portrayal of a pimp with his cane and gold teeth. We're talking about handsome young men,
Right.
Very often, even girls now are used. These girls are very often in gangs, and so they're being controlled by the men to build relationships with other girls. And these are scary things to talk about, but that's why it's so important to educate parents, educate the children, let them know this is happening, and it's happening in our backyard.
That's you said 17,000 trafficked right here in the U.S., and that's very interesting. It's also very disappointing. And I guess the question that I have, that I'm sure some other listeners have, is why isn't the government doing anything about this issue, both here and other countries? And if they are, why isn't their strategy working?
Well, the government is doing something here in the U.S., and it's just a matter of funds to be able to carry out more programs, to be able to have more grants, more financing for safe houses, to be able to work with NGOs. It's always an issue of funding, and that's why it's a beautiful picture where a lot of churches are stepping up. A lot of Christians are coming together to be able to fund these safe houses, to be able to do these outreaches. I've heard of youth groups praying around strip clubs where there were victims of trafficking in those clubs. I actually spoke with a lady not too long ago in Texas who was trafficked by her husband and forced to dance in a strip club.
Wow.
And, you know, when she got home, he would have people that were paying to do things there as well. And so these things are happening, and the Christian community is really standing up and really making a difference, making themselves known as people that these young ladies, these girls, can go to.
That's interesting, because it seems like lately this aspect of sex trafficking has been thrust into the public eye recently, especially with movies, and you mentioned such as Taken, and we see Liam Neeson getting his daughter, but that's like in Eastern Europe, and somehow we have this mindset at someplace else. And you and I, we had a conversation about this once. We talked about an organization such as Halo Corps that comes to mind. What can you tell us about some of these other methods of rescuing that are both good and bad?
Well, to go in, and with Halo Corps, I believe it is, they have... You hire... It's important to be able to go and get the girls where they are, and it takes brute force very often. And so the model of Taken, you know, it's a funny thing because, the model of Taken, one of my colleagues was talking about the movie, and he said, you know, I did the research, and the statistical probability of Liam Neeson being your father is very low. So we need to keep doing what we're doing with Rescue Innocence.
Right.
And that's just the truth. We do need the FBI. We do need different organizations that will go in and do the rescues. Now, the problem is that the aftercare and the counseling and the place for the girls, it can take years, if not a lifetime, to be able to recover from what had happened to them.
It's not just kicking the door down and grabbing them and saying you're rescued.
No, that's just the very beginning. And then it's a long process. It's a lifelong commitment to being a survivor. And it takes professionals. It takes physical rescue. It takes emotional rescue through counseling and spiritual rescue.
So the nature of what you do, Brent, is it's very mentally and spiritually draining. What inspired you to take on this challenge and begin and receive this call to found this organization, Rescue Innocence?
You know, I was in South Africa with some friends, and one of them was actually a psychologist for the police force there. And he told me that for the World Cup, 40,000 girls were being kidnapped and brought to South Africa to be raped by the fans. And I could not let that number go. It was so overwhelming, so mind-blowing. And to know that the World Cup soccer in 2010 was just one of many large sports events. And my reaction was, well, you know, we should just stop having sports altogether, because if it's big crowds doing this, who cares who wins a game? But a more practical thing was to come back and to do an outreach to the young ladies. And so 10 girls were rescued through that outreach during the World Cup. And once I had a part of that, it's you can't go back to normal life, if you will, because there's this whole world out there of people that need someone who will surrender sort of the American dream, surrender their idea of what they want to get out of life, and say, you know, I'm going to give my life to helping people like you, to helping rescue you, to help meet the needs that you have in every capacity, to help prevent this from happening to anyone else. And so it was a matter of going and being a part of good organized effort to help the victims of trafficking during the games. And so coming back to the States, I shared the stories, and I went to any speaking events that would have me, and it just grew. And Rescue Innocence, it became an organization on its own just by sharing about
awesome.
rescuing innocence.
That's great. Brent, what is the one thing that you can look to in your ministry to help you keep strong, the one thing that you can come back to as a source of strength and inspiration for the work that you're involved with?
For me, it's the cross. I look at the cross and I see what Christ did, and that he suffered intentionally. And we're talking about slavery. We're talking about something that is unwillful, that is forced. And there's no hope without the cross, without a Savior that put himself in a situation to be abused, to be mocked, to be tortured, to suffer. And that is where the hope is. When I'm with somebody who has suffered severely through this practice, there is always that common ground of Christ died for you.
Mm-hmm.
He understands. He has been in a situation to suffer. And no matter what has happened to you, no matter what you've been told, no matter what has been done to you, no one can take away what Christ has done for you. I was actually in the home of a lady. She made dinner for some of my colleagues and myself, and she shared with us that she had had a vision of Jesus, and she felt loved. She didn't feel condemned, and she wanted to know more about him because she'd met him. And that was a beautiful turning point from where she was constricted by her religious beliefs. She felt like she deserved the punishment, that it was a matter of karma, and to know that Jesus himself loved her and forgave her of any sin. And that's a message that we can all take, because whether you've been trafficked or not, we're all guilty and we all need a Savior. And that's where Christ comes into the picture, and he rescues us. And so he takes that innocence and he renews that we had when we were babies, before we were corrupted, before we allowed ourselves to give into sin. And he makes us pure again, rescuing our innocence.
How about that? Yeah. Brent, we want our listeners to get more involved and to support your ministry, and as you described, the abolitionist movement to end this modern day slavery. What can you tell them about how they can get involved, and where you can direct them to, and what can you say about those who are too afraid, I suppose, of getting involved due to the brevity and nature of sex trafficking?
Well, there are a lot of ways to get involved now. The internet has so many resources where you can study. Education is a big weapon that we have against this, and it's available. There are all kinds of seminars happening now. Victims are coming out and speaking, which is beautiful, because a big part of healing is being able to have control of your own story, being able to take charge of what happened to you and share that with others. So to go out there and to raise awareness, to let people know this is happening, we don't know the impact. We don't know how many people we save by letting them know that there's a danger to be saved from. Once you're kind of established as far as your education and you're ready to go into the workforce, look into counseling, look into social work, look into actually joining an anti-trafficking organization. If you're a law student, see what kind of laws there are against human trafficking and see how they're being enforced in the court of law, because that's one of the areas where we really are failing. If you're in law enforcement, look at what organizations are out there that you can join that does do the rescues, or that see about task forces, see what local authorities are doing in the battle of human trafficking, and if they aren't, look at starting something. There are so many ways that you can get involved with this. If you're a musician, write music that educates people about it. If you're a graphic designer, look at doing a website for an anti-trafficking organization that's starting out, that doesn't have their funding. If you're good at writing, look into grant writing. Offer your abilities to anti-trafficking organizations that are looking to do something. We all have gifts. We all have talents that we can bring, and it's a matter of harnessing those to be able to help tell the stories of the victim, and also to be able to tell the stories of hope.
Brent, those are some excellent suggestions, and I just want to thank you for joining with us today. It's a pleasure to have you on our show.
Pleasure's all mine.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into our show. If you want to be a part of our program, go to truedeclination.com. And as always, if you disagree with the comments and viewpoints expressed, we encourage you to submit a rebuttal piece to add to the discussion. All rebuttals will be carefully considered, and if published, will be featured in a counterpoint session on True Declination's podcast, Thinking Clearly. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and check out our site for new podcasts, articles, and resources to help expand Christ's kingdom. Thank you, and God bless.